Good evening. The purpose of this meeting is to conduct the business of the Gettysburg Area School District. Board of Directors meetings and committee meetings are open to the public but are not public meetings. All school district residents who wish to make public comment should sign in prior to the start of the meeting and request to speak during citizens' participation. Public comment is welcome and all issues will be referred to the appropriate board, committee, or administrator. Comments will be summarized in the official board minutes, which will be made available by contacting the business office. Please take a moment to silence your cell phone or any other electronic devices. Mike and Ryan are excused. Everyone else is present. Pledge allegiance, please stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Belinda, did you want to take the moment during communications under 3.1, or were you waiting until 6.1, items for board action?
I think I had it planned underneath the communications piece.
Oh, your floor then.
Okay. Good evening, board and community public members. This evening we have the proposed final budget before you. I'll go through, review some of the slides. One of the slides has been updated and I'll review that, but it is in the final presentation and it has also been updated on the website too. So I proposed, again, we presented last meeting a 0% increase as well as a 1% increase to address the ACTI's bond funding. So the 1% column, of course, is there, but what is highlighted is the 0% column is there, but what is highlighted is the 1% column. And you can see that both categories, the main difference in the revenue side here is the local revenue. So of course, at 0%, we would have $49,564,388, and if it's a 1%, it's $49,924,592. As I mentioned in the previous meeting, what we did is we updated the local revenue according to what the most recent assessment values are. We reached out to the county, obtained information, also did some estimates on some new properties that will likely hit July 1 with the new tax bills. So we did some estimation increasing the local revenue in that aspect, as well as we changed the collection percent simply because the history shows that while we are at 96.5% collections, we are over 97%. So we reflected the collection rate in the new budget as well. So you can see that overall the local sources, which includes the largest increases in local, of course, is the real estate taxes, earned income, and interest. And so our local sources there are listed at 5.2%. This is assuming it's the 1% above the previous budget. And our state sources, of course, same number for the 0 as well as the 1%, simply because we've already included what the governor's estimated numbers for us. We're not at the very high end of what he's estimating. We are being, at least we're guaranteed something, but we're not guaranteed the largest percent that he is appropriating. And of course, the budget has not passed yet, and likely we will need to move forward when we're estimating some. The state sources also includes an increase in transportation subsidy, a slight increase in the PSER subsidy, and again, the basic ed subsidy, which is the unused, unbudgeted portion that came out after we did the current year's budget. So those three things increased the state sources by 6.3%. Federal sources are remaining same. Again, there is no ESSER money in these federal sources. This is all Title I money. So it's Title I, II, III, and IV, as well as some IDEA sources that are coming through. Other sources are pretty much, as you can see, we are down to $5,055. Other sources to us are sale of assets. So while we budgeted $22,000 for the sale of assets in 23-24, we dropped the local revenue down to simply because of the actual of 22-23 because we didn't have that many sale of assets. And so, of course, you know, that you'll see the largest swing in the percent simply because we're lowering that. We're not estimating to be as high as 22,000. It made no sense at all to keep it at 22,000. So we looked at the revenue sourcing as being consistent with what we actually received in 22-23. Use of fund balance, it's below. We have historically set money aside for PSERS. We have a plan in place that the funds that were set aside for PSERS, we're incrementally using that towards PSERS increases as we move forward. Other assigned fund balance that are listed there are there as of, you know, close of the audit, which I'll review a little bit later. And we also show that, you know, we plan to use the future medical. So this slide is different from the previous presentation simply because new assessment data, additional estimation on properties that are going to be hitting the market as of July 1 for the new assessed bills. And so, and also you can see the difference between the 0% and the 1% column. And again, this is the proposed final. This is not the final budget. And so, you know, we'll talk a little bit more. But basically, that is the difference in last month's presentation to this month's presentation. The proposed final expenditures, the 0% column and the 1% column are exactly the same. As it stands right now, we are at $76,290,017, and overall it's a 3.6% increase over prior year. Some of the areas that did reduce were professional services, which is some IU services because we have brought back some services, as well as the purchase of property services include some utilities, as well as the supplies have reduced because there's also some additional supplies such as natural gas, electric, water, sewer. And other objects reduced in a sense of, I believe that is the capital, that's the budgetary reserve. So overall, salaries and benefits combined equal 2.2%. It comes in at $45,816,911. And then, of course, the other categories are listed here. 300 professional services are typically IU. 400 are purchase of property services, such as anything ranging from lawn care to facility facility updates and maintenance items. 500 is charter and transportation, the largest percentages of that category. Charter continues to rise. I know in the previous presentation, Mr. Moyer had asked me specifically how much charter is up. I incorrectly stated, I said 4.2 million. It is actually 4.8 million presently as actual cost. So, and that includes our cyber charter and our bricks and mortar charter. So there's no separation between the two. They're just cyber cost. The object code is 561. Transportation has increased, as I mentioned before, the contractual increases, the diesel, the just overall, the increases, the shortages of drivers. It is nothing short of a miracle that we are continuing to operate the same way simply because every day I'm hearing of, oh, we're drivers short and they sent somebody else, or we had to do a double run, or just today, Mr. Bowling had said, I almost had to go out because a driver had an immediate need to go to the emergency room. So it is a continual concern. We are still promoting anyone who is interested in driving to please contact us simply because we're shortage of drivers and we need to get our kids to and from as safely as possible and promptly as to keep on our schedule. Other financing sources, this is an increase simply because the ACTI funding is in here, because of the bond funding. So we are estimating at least the percent of first year bond funding on $10 million. Again, now if ACTI comes in and they approve their bond where it's 20, 30, 40, 50 million, that number is going to increase for us, but we're at least starting at the $10 million estimation that PFM has provided ACTI. Overall, between the budget revenue and the budget expenditures, we have a shortfall of $2.7 million. How we're going to make that up is, in a slide or two in just a few minutes. 0% tax increase, we still have a shortfall of $2.7 million, and the negative $360,000 is what we would need to find in expenditures, additional cut expenditures or appropriations of fund balance to make up a 0 tax percent increase. If we are going with a 1% tax increase, of course, the revenue will pretty much account for the $360,000, but we're still at a shortfall of $2.7 million that we plan to use unassigned fund balance for. This slide here is the board has regularly seen. So as of the fund balance of 6/30/24, and this is of course with the audit as well, $7.3 million is unassigned fund balance. Our proposed revenues, as you can see listed there, are $73 million, either 0 or 1%, PSERS, healthcare, and our total expenditures are $76,290,000. And again, our unused fund balance at 6% limit. So in other words, we're permitted by policy to use to maintain at least a minimum of 6%. 6 to 8% is what by policy that we're permitted to maintain. So use of fund balance to be at 6% limit is we're limited to 2.7 million use of fund balance based upon the expenditures. So again, if the expenditures change, the percent of fund balance changes for the unassigned. So again, if we're looking to reduce expenditures as we move forward to maintain a 0%, that fund balance utilization will change because it's a percent of expenditures. And in order to maintain limits to our policy, then our ending fund balance to be at 6% unassigned, that would be $4.5 million. Again, here's the summary of the slide that we did before, but I updated 2 items on this that I'd just like to bring your attention. So increases to this budget, of course, for salary, inclusion of the 4th police officer. We have the girls' head wrestling coach and the 1 assistant. Medical insurance costs have gone up. It's 12% increase. The ACTI tuition has gone up. Cyber charter schools, transportation, technology, software, and supports in order to make sure that we're safe and secured with any cyber concerns. The ACTI bond funding for future debt borrowing. And then, of course, then I added in here, which was not on the slide before, which is the capital funds. We increased historical average. Historically, we have always tried to be about the $1 million mark. This budget represents bringing that average back up to $1 million to fund the future capital projects. Decreases, again, our workman's comp. This was looking at our current rates and what we have been paying. We've had some really good claims because we're self-insured. Reduction in IU services, as I mentioned before, which you can see in the expenditure slide. Reduction in the purchase of property services. That's the 400 category that I covered a little bit before, which is the disposal, lawn care, water, and sewage. And then the reduction in supply is the natural gas, fuel, oil, and electricity. The supply, natural gas, fuel, oil, and electricity, we joint procure. So, of course, we try to procure, working with the IU and the procurement system, we try to procure when NYMEX and or the cost of the product is lower than what it has been. So we are regularly meeting as a group, and we're constantly monitoring the markets in terms of the suppliers that we use. So we've been doing fairly well. We have always been at or below what we procured the year before, and we tend to purchase either by quarter, by half, or by years. Just depends, and market fluctuates regularly. We've been very successful in doing this joint procurement method. And then, of course, the reduction in budgetary reserve to 6%. This is historically, as you can see, Act 1 indexes have been far above what GASD has been doing as tax increases for consideration as we move forward. So I believe the slide here is as represented as of, I think it's 1819? Yes, 1819. And you can see the index has gone from 2.4% up to 6.2%, which is the current year. And then, of course, you can see where the years that we increased taxes and the years that we did not increase taxes, and have been at or below 1%. So for a 7-year average, the increase is 0.67%. In consideration of 1% index or zero, the average homeowner parcel, based upon the assessment data provided by the county, so this is a highlighted column. So 269,368 is the market assessed value. So at 1% tax increase, it would be an additional $30.30 annually. At the index, it would, of course, have been 188.02. We're only showing this as a reflection just to show the difference between 1% and the index. There's no assumption that the board would ever go up to the index, because we don't normally typically go to the index or even consider going over the index if we're able to adjust the budget, that we don't have to go that high. Again, the calculation down below, so for example, 269,368 at the mill rate, with the 1%, you can see what the parcel tax would be and the $30.30. Now, what I provided you this evening is a handout, but it is in here. This is the impact with homestead farmstead. Why we like to show this and why we try to wait to the last minute is because, we receive information from the county on our approved homestead farmstead properties, and 2, the state provides us what the gambling revenue is provided to the districts May 1st. So that pot of money that is Gettysburg's, we use to provide homestead farmstead reductions to those approved properties in Gettysburg. So this slide, I think, is relative here simply because, well, if we were to go 1%, which is, beside the 0%, what is the actual effect on the average homeowner with homestead farmstead? So this slide represents then, if you look down to the middle of the page, the homestead farmstead annual tax reduction for 23-24 was $201.68. If you were to go to a 1% tax increase, then the tax would be $236.87. I'm sorry, not tax, homestead farmstead reduction. So really, in essence, going a 1%, the change over homestead farmstead is $35.19 between one year to the next. However, at a 1% tax increase, new money on a base average homestead would be $30.30. So that is a net change of $4.89. That is, so it's in essence no tax increase at all, because the homestead farmstead is increasing in allocation this year. It's the distribution of all the properties. The allocation is changing, is increasing. So the only way that would net zero is if the market assessed value is at $312,800. Then the expectation is your zero line. So you have a 1% increase, and you are not receiving $4.89. You're at 0% net effect. So this is the first time that I will say that the homestead farmstead number has increased greatly by the governor, and he has since stated that there's another 5-year commitment on the table to help funding homestead farmstead, which is a great thing, simply because it is a reduction of the tax bills automatically for those parcels that are approved homestead farmstead. So, in looking at the net effect is on an average parcel, it negates really a tax increase at 1%. Moving forward tonight, again, this is not the final budget. So what is listed on the agenda is to adopt a proposed final. This is according to Act 1, and this is required. So to vote, while you're not saying 0%, 1%, you're just adopting a proposed budget. At this point, it's to meet that requirement by PDE. There is a 30-day requirement from the proposed final to the final adoption. So again, depending upon how the vote goes tonight, just share with the board that if in the event that the budget does not pass, the proposed final budget does not pass this evening, your very next meeting, you will have to take a vote on the proposed final, and then you will have to have a special meeting after June 17th, simply because we need to meet the 30-day requirement by the Act 1 and PDE's guidelines. So based upon that, this timeline is assuming we have a vote for this evening. This would be the outline. May 20th, we'll have a public board hearing. June 3rd, we'll review and recommend for the final budget. June 17th is the vote for the final budget. And then, of course, the deadline to file with the department is typically 15 days after, but they say no later than obviously June 30th. And 9 times out of 10, all districts have to approve their budgets before the state even moves forward on their own. So this is the review. I mean, if there's any questions I can provide to you, please let me know. But I did not anticipate any more additional revenue coming forward. The anything if for future discussions would reducing the expenditures, again, which would change the appropriation of fund balance based upon that percent. So we can discuss anything that the board so chooses to discuss, but this in the end, the revenue is the revenue, and so it's just a matter of changing the expenditures and or the appropriations of fund balance.
So for housekeeping, because we do have if we have a motion for the proposed budget this evening, I think it'd probably be prudent right now while we're on the topic, if a board member has any questions for Belinda, not saying you can't answer them if there's a motion under question, but while it's fresh in everybody's minds, probably is the appropriate time. So if somebody wants to be, I'll recognize somebody if they have a question, and we can move forward.
Couple comments, random comments and questions. So Belinda, I think I heard you say in the one slide, 5 out of the last 6 or 5 out of the last 7 years, we've increased taxes less than 1%, and a couple years, 0.
Correct. Yeah. And down there at the bottom, there's a note that's been carrying forward. I know with Dr. Perrin coming to Gettysburg, the concept was is if we increase taxes incrementally, there is never a need to be over and above the index as we move forward. That's not always the case that we can do so, but I know his proposal was, basically over the years, and our goal for the budget tax resolution that we have, we want to become to the point where we are not relying on fund balance, that revenue equals expenditures, and we can move forward. So there is that tax resolution that the board adopted that will take initiatives over the next 5-10 years to get to that point in time.
Thank you. And by board policy, we need to keep a fund balance of minimally 6%. The 4.5 million with a 1% increase does accomplish that?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
The shortfall of 2.7 over time, if we don't do something, scares me with the compounding effect of that year over end. Dr. Dalton, this is a kind of a random question. I've been reading a little bit about the new Title IX regulations coming out of D.C. What else has to happen before they go into effect that would impact public schools in Pennsylvania?
As far as I know, the effective date is August 1st, but I also know that there is a lawsuit challenging their implementation. So I'd have to, and that I just read last week, so I'd have to check on the progress of that suit, but otherwise it would be in effect in August. I don't know, is your question how it would affect the budget?
To some degree, yes. But I personally, as I've read over some of the information or the regulations that are in there, I'm only speaking for myself right now. I'm personally very uncomfortable with that type of agenda and the expectations that Dr. Matzer, Dr. Perrin, and the team here would have to abide by those regulations. That concerns me. I almost feel like saying, and Belinda, I don't know, the title funds that we receive from DC, I know it's not a lot of the total budget. It's what, about 1.5%, 2% of our total budget? 1% or less.
Sorry, it's 1% or less.
I almost feel like making a proposal saying, you know what, keep your funds, and we're going to keep on doing things the way that we have. Lee, I'm sure that's not kosher.
But I will say, if you're considering all federal funds and doing that, that's much higher simply because your National School Lunch Program is all federally funded. So
Yeah.
while I mentioned the 1% or less, I'm thinking of Title I, II, III, and IV. I'm not thinking of
Yeah, that's
National
what I was
School
thinking
Lunch.
of as well.
Yeah.
I
But
don't
it
know.
is much higher if we go, because we're probably about two and a half million more if we look at the National School Lunch Program.
Well, hopefully some of these lawsuits will be successful, and we won't expect to be executing that type of agenda that's coming out of D.C. But thank you. That finishes my questions.
Any additional board members? Belinda, I have a couple then. And it was brought to my attention. I took a look at it, and I know we spoke, but for board purposes, when you turn to page 61 of the audit, you have a budget, money, and expenditures difference there, and it seems to be one of those reoccurring things that we've had conversation about year in, year out. You familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yes. So, if you want me to review
Please.
page 61 of the audit, so of course, as we receive the final audit, it is available on our website, and so I apologize that it took this long, and further discussions we'll cover, but page 61 of the audit, so in summary, we received a variance. I'm talking about the variance that's on the page. We received total revenues of $5.2 million in excess of what we budgeted. And then we've overexpended by $1.7 million from what we budgeted. All those dollars are related to ESSER. So we received more money in ESSER, and we expended throughout these categories in ESSER. Did we use fund balance that we projected when we did this 2.5 years ago? No, we did not. Which the benefit of that, our fund balance increased by this page by $791,000. So we did not use $2.9 million of unassigned fund balance, which will be used to plan for the next budget cycle. So when it's not used, it sits in unassigned fund balance and it's reappropriated for the budget differences. So, we are moving it forward. It may sit in fund balance at the end of the year, but it's going to be utilized the next budget cycle or the next budget cycle, depending upon where we're at in the process. So when we plan our budgets, we plan a year and a half of what's actually occurring. A lot of unknowns, of course, at that point. And so we did the same situation as what we're doing right now back then. We looked according to policy. What was the difference between revenue and expenditures, and we used unassigned fund balance in terms with our policy. Same thing would likely happen again. So, if absent of all ESSER money, we would not have seen this type of increase. We would have probably been at 0% increase and/or likely a utilization of fund balance up to the point of $2.9 million. No. But again, the reasons why this looks the way it is simply because of ESSER. There's no other explanation other than this 22-23 school year. Yes, we did increase taxes. If you look at this slide here. 22-23, we did 1.38%. So when the finalized audit came through, local real estates increased $450,000 simply because we increased 1.38%, and collection rate was better. That's why we're increasing the collection rate for the next budget cycle. Other areas that this audit increased, our earned income has been up dramatically. So, which means people are earning more, people are paying more local earned income tax. We receive estimations from our York Area Tax Bureau on an ongoing basis. And again, year after year, I sit on the board. Year after year, we're hearing how much more they're collecting in advance, and the money's being distributed quickly rather than sitting on it. Every year, they have a quick turnaround for the collections. So while we receive estimates from them, the collection rate has increased, as well as the other area in local taxes that has seen a dramatic change was the interest rate. Those three areas is what caused the local revenue to increase. Between state and federal, all ESSER. And
But ESSER dies.
ESSER dies,
Fades
yes.
away.
And
It's gone.
so the why it looks so different here in this audit is simply because we didn't budget for ESSER. We did the year before because that was the information that we had at that time. But then information came along saying, well, you should be expending what you're receiving. It should be a budget neutral type of thing. You should not necessarily have to budget for it because money's in is what you're going to be spending out. And so now we're seeing the reflection of the biggest swing in revenue because it's coming in and we're expensing it out. So absent of ESSER, I think we're, as Dr. Parent had mentioned before and can vouch for this, that we're incrementally dropping the utilization of fund balance because we were getting, again, more accurate numbers up until the very end. Are we going to be 100% accurate? No. No one has that crystal ball to be 100% accurate. But we work and present with the numbers that we know at a particular point in time. The estimations from the county on, for example, the estimations for the county said so many properties are coming through. Well, you can estimate 15, but will you really get 15 at the beginning of July 1? No. Those are 15 that are started maybe in Amblebrook, but that's not 15 that's going to be in the tax market at that time. So we did half the number of parcels, thinking at least half of them will be hopefully available. So we do estimations based upon what the county's most recent numbers are. So we can only go off the numbers that is presented to us at the best time to provide and move forward with it. So we could always estimate high, so there's no utilization of fund balance, but then the board would probably come back and say, you did a horrible job. Why didn't you do anything better or accurate? At least with the non-utilization of fund balance, that money is not lost. It's in fund balance, and it's used for a future point in time. It's also used, as I mentioned in the previous slides that we presented, that's our cash flow until tax revenue starts funding. It's, so many days of cash flow. That's what our fund balance is used for in over the months that revenue is hold out.
You and Jason, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, indicated to this board that you could come in at 0 this year. And I think the pendulum switched or moved with ACTI. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It's just that's what I'm hearing is the 1% is not so much the 1% that we would say to have to cover expenditures and because of revenues, et cetera, and still keeping our fund balance. The 1% is more planning ahead for our ACTI commitment. And you're estimating, I don't mean you personally, but the district's estimate is a $10 million bond potentially, correct?
Yeah, it's based on 10 million, and it would be based on our share of the 10 million because there's other districts that have the share.
Let me ask you this. What happens if that bond comes in at 30 million?
Then we will need to come back and have an increase to fund that level of bond.
When?
Well, if they're, great question.
I mean, it's a real life question because we don't know what that is.
No.
If they come in with a bond in October of 24 at 30 million, what does the district do?
District's going to have to use fund balance.
And then what happens next year to us?
We have to have the tax increase. Our commitment to ACTI will be our commitment to ACTI, so it'll depend upon what that bond funding looks like. Like other districts in the area, we are proposing to start out at the 10 million, and you probably have seen other districts' notifications in the Gettysburg Times that they are planning in their budgets to fund this. So this is us following suit and also helping to fund a minimum of 10 million. Will it be enough? No, not by any means. If they have to build a brand new building, 10 million is not even going to cut it to even have a quarter of a wing to have a facility.
But the district's position is, if, let's say it stays at 10 million, we're financially, I don't want to say okay, it's feasible financially until we come back to the next budget process in '25, correct?
Yes.
Okay? But it is not at 30.
It is not a 30, and we'll likely have to increase it once we know more with ACTI, once they move along their process. This budget right now includes an increase, and that is really much the 1% tax increase to help fund $10 million.
Are there any additional questions from board members? Alice?
Just a follow-up question, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but talking about waiting on information back from them, or not waiting, but, you know, there's unknowns there. Do you know what their timeline is for knowing more set numbers for that?
Mr. Davis, I'm not sure, and
I was gonna say, maybe it's not known yet, yeah.
It is not known. They don't know. They still continue to look for either a building or a piece of property. They have nothing, I mean, they've done feasibility studies. They know, you know, they have a very good game plan as far as what they want to do. It's just that the right piece of ground or building has not presented itself. And, you know, while they're trying to do the best they can for our students in the neighboring districts, all the districts involved, they also they got to be realistic with what they're trying to do. So they just don't have, they understand the stress that it's putting on the district. So they're trying to get, you know, they're looking at the best options, you know, for all of us. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think, given what you're saying then, Kenny, I feel it sounds like it is wise to start planning, right? Because we don't know where that's headed, and then, you know, wouldn't be behind the curve on it. Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
Alice, I'm not advocating for 1%, because truthfully, it's a proposed budget, so
Right.
wherever it lands, and it's my understanding whether a proposed budget at 1%, if that's what this board is looking at, that can go down as we get additional information before the final budget, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We're not locked into anything.
you're not locked in anything. We could have additional, as an essence, $360,000 of cut expenditures.
Yeah, it's just helpful to know that
Right.
that intention of that increase would be to help fund
Right.
that new ACT.
But once again, school boards are doing it blind.
Right.
We're doing it blind because our audit doesn't come in until 2 weeks prior or a week prior. We're doing it blind because we don't know what exact state funding we're getting. We don't know what federal funding we're getting. We don't know what the cyber charter school funding is going to change our part of that. We have now, in no fault of ACTI, I commend that. Once again, we don't know if it's 10 million, 15 million, or 30. So the board sits here once again in another fiscal year, voting with one hand tied behind our back. On the auditor thing, the recommendation, and I think, I don't want to, because I haven't talked to the board, but my understanding is that I think the board's going to prefer us, like you said, look elsewhere.
Yeah.
So we get a more timely audit. And I'm not knocking the former audit group, but it traditionally has been longer and longer and longer.
There's an information item, which I was going to cover a little later on in the agenda.
Linda, just one or two more real quick things. During my tenure on this board, there has been a time where we did find out before voting in June on the final budget that what our state subsidy was going to be, and we actually reduced the increase that we were anticipating. Am I right? That was a few years ago?
That was a few years ago.
By some miracle, maybe that'll happen again?
No, it's nothing short of a miracle is going to happen.
Right. And then the other thing regarding ACTI, I still teach graduate students at McDaniel, and I have a couple that are in career and technical institutes in the state of Maryland, I think Pennsylvania, and I think across the nation. We're finally getting it, that there is a demand for those career and technical positions, and not every child is meant to go to a 4-year traditional college. And whether that's 10 million or 30 million or whatever, I do feel that Adams County, that's going to be a great investment for us in the future. Thank you.
Oh, I echo that. I'm wholeheartedly behind ACTI and the value to that for our students and the entire community at large. It's just hard sitting here when you're talking, and I know it's only a proposed budget, when we don't know where those numbers are going to come in. and then turn around and they come in higher. Next year, we're going to have a discussion at 3.1% to cover a shortfall that we didn't plan for. Any additional questions? Okay.
Just one more thing I want to add, just so the board's aware. Now, the 1% in consideration is not, it does not go towards the other expenditures. It is 1% that's set aside specifically for ACTI funding. And it will stay that way moving forward until the board provides an additional amount towards it. So it is similar to how we would borrow. We set what the rate is, and we commit that level of mill rates to the bond borrowing.
Thank you. All right. Next up, citizens' participation. Mr. Stillwell?
Thank you, Belinda, for your excellent segue. Mr. President, I have been absent from this forum for quite a while. I'm sorry for that. But now that I see that it's open season on raising taxes on property owners, I think it's time for the taxpayers to be heard again. With regard to your comment from the last meeting, Mr. President, the taxpayers do not feel that you came out of the audit with flying colors. And you can look to page 61, which you've already introduced as evidence to that. I would also like to point out that despite the budget director's minimization of the impact of the tax increase, that 45% of retirees are living solely on Social Security. Don't think that doesn't have an impact on them, especially with the inflation rates that we've seen over the last 2 years. It has an impact. So last time I spoke to this group, I was here to debunk a statement that Michelle Smyers had made that there was no fat in the Gettysburg area school district budgets. And I presented, actually page 61, from the previous 3 years' audits, showing that there was not only fat, but millions of dollars of fat in that budget. So when I finally got access to the audit from last year, just last week, I think Thursday, I was anxious to see how the district had adjusted its performance. So immediately I looked at the expenditures and I saw that, wow, they overexpended by $1.77 million. I thought, well, that's a really good start on bringing down the excess fund balance in the budget. And then I looked at the bottom line and found out that they ended the year with a net surplus of $3.73 million. I said, fat must be someplace else. And sure enough, all you have to do is look at the revenues to find out that the district underestimated its revenues by $5.264 million. I said to myself, well, we know that the state is usually delinquent in telling us what we're going to get, so probably most of it is there. And indeed, there was some from the state and some from the federal government as well. But then I looked at the local revenue line. Underestimate local revenues by $2.54 million. These are property taxes. You have access to the whole property tax database. You should know exactly how much revenue you're going to get. $2.5 million underestimate. That was a good part. That's half of the fat right there. A $3.7 million surplus at the end of last year. My daddy used to say, you know, the best indication of future results is past performance. Okay? This budget year, the last one that you just had the audit for, was the same year that the administration insisted that they needed a 1.38% tax increase just to balance the budget. Whoops. $3.73 million surplus. So I ask you, Are you prepared to go on faith with the numbers that you've just seen tonight for this coming budget? Are you? Al? Michelle? Kenny? Or are you going to let them do it to you again? And this is not the first time. It's been going on for years. And I've spoken to you about that.
Thank you, Mr. Stillwell. Routine approvals. This evening, we are going to separate 5.4, the human resources. So may I have a motion for 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3, agenda, regular board minutes, and regular board minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Question? Hearing none. Al?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
And I vote yes. 5.4, human resources. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Question? Cindy?
The amount for the project the amount for the project manager, salary, $86,000 a year. Is that a normal, was that determined to be a normal project manager salary at that level? Is that?
I believe that falls into the range. Belinda, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
The entry range was 85,000.
Entry.
Entry was minimum at 85, and then I don't know what the maximum was of him, but the offer, I believe, was what was listed in there. Yes.
Okay. One more question. I read your note, Dr. Perrin, that this particular position was deemed to be totally covered by other positions that are no longer being used. And would there be a way to put that on the piece of paper that goes out to the public so that they know that? I mean, as it is, there's nothing on paper for that.
I have to double check with Dr. Perrin about that, but I can certainly get that information for you.
Okay, thank you. That would be it.
Any additional?
I have something.
Michelle?
This is also in regards to the project manager. I know we had this conversation 6 months ago about hiring a project manager, and I was against it then. I was also against hiring an assistant facilities director. Somehow the position appeared on the HR page for hiring prior to anyone even approving the assistant or the project manager here in August. And then in September, after I made some comments about it, we created a supervisor of maintenance and a supervisor of custodians. And we hired from within, and we hired very good people to fill those positions. And I was under the assumption at that point in time that that would alleviate the workload of Mr. Reynolds that's apparently so very daunting. But here we are again, and as Cynthia has mentioned, there was a blurb in Dr. Perrin's email saying that there was not going to be an increase in the budget because we were eliminating the assistant facility director position. Never in this district's history prior to us hiring an assistant director of facilities has we ever needed one. And now to say that we're going to have a project manager insinuates one of two things. Either the district is planning to have a never-ending cycle of building construction, or this isn't going to be a permanent position. And it's only going to be needed for a limited amount of time. But let's just remember that as a public school, we're nothing more than a tentacle of the government. And like the government, we're going to continue to grow our bureaucracy right from the top. And we just had our conversation about our tax increase. And we've justified this 1% by saying that we need it for ACTI. And I want you to understand, I agree with funding ACTI. I agree with ACTI's mission. And I support pre-planning for paying for them. What I don't support is growing the bureaucracy within the district, because this administration recommends that we hire somebody to help. This is not going to be a temporary position. This is going to be an Act 93 position, which comes with all the bells and whistles. So it's not even an $86,000 a year position. It's way more than that with all of the benefits that the taxpayers will be on the hook for in perpetuity. Quite frankly, I think it's time for all of us sitting at this table to think about how in the world we're going to stop growing the bureaucracy at the top. We are a top-heavy district. Mr. Reynolds is getting paid handsomely for his work, all at taxpayer expense. And when you're a member of the six-figure club, I expect you to be able to perform six-figure work. We've made it easier on him by creating these supervisory positions, and now we're going to make it even easier to hire a project manager. Future boards are going to have to figure out how to keep all of these people employed, and frankly, without cutting a whole lot from the budget, things that might actually affect our students will be faced with a tax increase after increase. This is our money. You need to start acting like it's coming directly from your own pocket, because it is. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your taxpayers. Take it seriously. That's all I have to say about it.
What's the definition of a six figures? So that's what I'd like to know. I hear this number, I hear people say this, I've heard you say it, the six-figure club. So what the hell should he be doing for six figures? Could you tell me that in detail?
Well, we've already eliminated him having to supervise maintenance. We've already eliminated having to worry about custodians. So now, what else is there?
You tell me. I don't know.
What
I'm
else
not the
is
one
there to do?
referencing it. I'm sick of hearing it all the time. You know, we want to bash
You don't have
everybody
a
for
pro-
what they
but see, the
make.
problem is you don't have a problem raising taxes on people.
Okay.
Mr. President, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I know that some of what we're referencing is kind of the historic positions that used to exist and now went away, and we've replaced some and kind of restructured that a bit. So I don't know exactly who to ask the question to, but I also know that the stuff with the assistant facilities director was prior to my time on the board. So what I'm wondering is if someone could kind of fill in a little bit of the historic roles, right? Because of course I know that this is part of the Finance and Facility Committee where you're discussing what is needed and what those roles entail, and a recommendation, from that committee has some weight in my book. So
Tim?
Sure. And before my tenure at school board, I couldn't tell you what the positions were called. But I do know when the last, rest from memory, that left, and Josh took over his position. When he was gone, we had an assistant, and that assistant took over his job until Josh got here, so we had an assistant for a while. So eliminating that position, it's just turned into a project manager position. Now, you can also justify, you're talking about, no matter what you do, you have to have somebody supervise that job site. If you don't hire somebody, you're getting a third party to do it, and that third party is going to cost you over $200,000 a year to do it, and they don't have your best interest at mind. This project's going to be over a year span, so you're going to spend more than $200,000 on that thing. Plus, the person that's going to be the project manager would also help with the capital projects that are going to be ongoing forever, because we always have capital projects. It might not be a $25 million HVAC project, but it's going to be $1 million project here, 500,000 project there. It's going to be a project that you want done correctly, so we know what we're paying for. That's why this person is going to be hired, or why it's up for us to hire that person. But that assistant has been around forever, whatever the title might have been, but there was always somebody to assist the person in Josh's position.
And Tim, for clarification purposes, and I've attended the facilities and finance meetings, the project manager title compared to the assistant facilities manager better aligns with what we are looking to do with our construction and renovation and capital projects currently and in the near future. And Belinda, correct me if I'm wrong, with eliminating the assistant facilities position, and even with the other responsibilities that people have with their job titles, expense-wise, it's neutral. Am I right, overall?
Expense-wise, it is neutral because I'm not sure if anyone remembers. I'm sure Mrs. Miller and Mr. Matzer would necessarily remember, but I was here in the time when we had a lead maintenance open position forever in the budget. That was eliminated and separated between the custodial supervisor and the maintenance supervisor. So those funds were provided appropriately. We elevated within, provided those additional funds by elimination of that one position and providing those funds to those two people. That was a budget neutral. We had the assistant listed in the budget, and the assistant was absent, and the project manager is a result of filling that particular position. Now, I will say that the construction management company in itself, minimally, I can speak to what Mr. Sigmund has said, minimally $250,000, and you wouldn't even have them here more than 3 days a week, at best 6 hours a day. And they still would not catch everything on the job site that is occurring. So the responsibility of the project manager is to make sure the fox is not watching the foxhole in terms of OmniTrain. And to speak also, Josh is involved in all of the supervisor meetings and is in constant contact with those supervisors, whether it's the custodial or whether it's the maintenance. And he still has the grounds and so forth. So he's doing now the job of a project manager without asking for any sort of additional compensation and continuing his current job role as it stands right now. But that's like the history of the lead maintenance position that has been eliminated to provide the two supervisors, and then that the assistant remains.
I'm sorry, one thing here, Jim. The other thing that I wanted to state too, in that same $250,000, you would not get anybody to be at this district, we'll say second shift. If they're doing night work, you're not getting one. They're not coming. They're not coming here on Saturdays if those guys are working. That's not going to happen. The other thing that you're talking about assistant who is just basically, and I don't mean to demean that position, but if Josh says, hey, I need you to do this, I need you to do that, the purpose of the project manager was somebody to have experience in doing projects and watch over the projects and not just have an assistant and you're telling them to go check this and go check that. That's this guy's job to do that. So you're hiring somebody with the experience to do so, and that's why we're hiring this person to look at our interests as a district.
It is to look at our interests, and it's to make sure that the taxpayers' money is being spent correctly, and there's not people taking advantage of that, and we're not overpaying for things. That's the whole point of it. I'm all for reconstructing to create the title, so we kind of have a custodian of that to make sure that that work is being done properly, coming in on time, and not costing this district, which in return is not costing the taxpayers.
Thank you
And for the record, I don't like raising taxes on my people, so you can put that in the paper.
That was a lot of different people answering my question, so I just want to take the time and say thank you. Appreciate the history on that.
Any additional question on 5.4? Roll call. Sorry. Al?
Yes.
Michelle?
No.
Tim,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Cindy,
No.
Jeremy.
Yes.
I vote yes. Brings us to items for board action. 6.1, proposed final budget.
So moved.
Well,
Second.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do them separate, but I didn't get a chance to finish because I had to cough. 6.1 is the approval of the proposed budget. At this current point, the recommended action is a projected tax increase of 1%. Final adoption is June 17th. This is not the final budget. So is there a motion for the recommended 1%?
I will second that. Apologies for not waiting. I will move to do that. Sorry, my brain is turning back on. Okay, here we are. I make that motion.
Second.
Question? And Belinda, this is a movable object, correct?
Yes, this isn't final.
No questions, roll call. Al,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Michelle,
No.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Cindy,
No.
Alice,
Yes.
and I vote yes. 6.2 is a sabbatical leave policy. 6.3 is policy on compensated professional leave. And 6.4 is a policy on uncompensated leave. They're getting combined. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Question? Hearing none, roll call. Alice,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Al,
Yes.
and I vote yes. 6.5 is retired personnel policies as needed, 300, 400, 500. I could have combined that. I just didn't know if there was any questions. That's basically eliminating or retiring 300, 400, 500 with the work that Mr. Dickerson and the policy committee did. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Question? Not a question, but a comment. Congratulations to the Policy Committee, Vice President Dickerson and team. I attend most of those meetings, and I think we've got a lot accomplished with the help of Dr. Dalton and her consultation. And by and large, Lee, I believe our policy manual is pretty much up to date.
Yeah, certainly on employment, and I think there's a few tweaks, because as we've added employment policies that refer to other policies, we're going to continue to loop around and make sure those are active, but yes.
Thank you. Hearing none further, roll call. Alice,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
What am I missing here?
Me.
Al
Yes.
And yourself.
and me. Under the informational items, you'll see 7.1, the professional services for the Warrior State East Side Assessment and team rooms. Jason's not here, so there was some discussion as to whether or not the expense that's listed there at $5,000 falls below the threshold for the administration to have to come to board approval for. But in terms of transparency, both to the rest of the board members who may not have been at facility meetings and to the public, Tim's recommendation, along with Josh and the financial people, or building and finance, thought it was prudent for us to put it on there. So basically, I'm going to let Tim do a real quick Reader's Digest version of what they're looking to do, and then again, it'll come up for an action item at next month's meeting, or next week's, 2 weeks.
Sure. We, along with the bleacher project at the stadium that's already in the capital projects plan, we had talked about a team rooms for a place for the high school kids that use the field down there, change, inappropriate weather, lightning, whatever, to get out of the way. And then we looked at a couple of them, and we had a change position, and and stuff. So, but we think what we've proposed would encompass all of that we talked about, the bleachers and stuff, and actually save us some money in the long run. Wouldn't be as expensive as we thought it was initially going to be. So this is just to kind of get that solidified so we know what we have in terms of a plan idea, I guess, to present. So that's all it's really for. Just we think we figured out a way to do everything we wanted to do and actually gain some stuff for actually less than what we were going to pay for all of it together before.
Does the board have any questions? I mean, you have an opportunity to review when it goes to an action item, but
Once again, not a question, but a comment. And it's certain nobody at this table is responsible for this, but that middle school is not that old. It's a beautiful, state-of-the-art building that's right there on the campus with our stadium. Why we did not accommodate for team rooms or appropriate locker rooms for guys and girls, for the athletic teams, for the high school at that time, is not the fault of anybody up here. But it's just really disappointing that wasn't taken into consideration back when it should have been. And that's disappointing, and why we even have to look at options for this now. I agree, and I support Tim's recommendation that we, give this careful consideration. It's just really disappointing, as we've talked about in our facilities and finance meetings, that we have to go through this. This is a problem that we inherited. Thank you.
any additional? The next information item, and I'm sorry, Belinda, I don't know how I overlooked at that in the agenda meeting and tonight, is the information on changing out or recommending a different auditor. It's my understanding, well, first off, I want to thank the auditors that have represented this district through the years. It just got to a point whether or not internally with them, with their workload, they were able to sufficiently provide us timely audits. I don't want to speak for them, but I do want to thank them, extend a thank you to them for the work they did do. But there is a recommendation for a new auditing firm coming in. Belinda?
Yes, so thank you. And yeah, again, we've had Smith Elliott, well, Krista Gardner now with Smith Elliott & Kearns now for many years. And so there were three areas with the audit. The most important thing is the delay of the audit, which we did participate in some of that, but it seemed to have hang on longer than what was anticipated, especially as longer as the previous year. So three things: the delay of the audit, communication, as well as the cost of the audit is why we were asked to look at a new firm. So reached out to another firm, obtained a proposal, 3 years at less cost of what we're presently paying. And at the end of 30 years, we currently would not be paying what we are at this particular date in time. So I received a proposal. We did not send an RFP out simply because this is a contracted service, and so therefore we do not need to provide an RFP for services of this type of magnitude. So again, we reached out, another reputable accounting firm, which is Boyer and Ritter, and they provided us a proposal. So therefore, I wanted to update the board that the next board meeting, we will probably have an action item on the agenda to approve this accounting firm for a 3-year agreement starting for the year ended June of '24.
Any questions? Thanks, Belinda. Board committee reports, are there any this evening?
Can I ask a
Oh,
question?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michelle. We'll look over.
Under committee reports, I know Finance and Facilities was supposed to discuss the parking lot at the middle school with the borough creating or building their new visitor center there. Can you give me an update on?
Sure. We did talk about it, but, we kind of pondered some ideas. I think Josh is trying to get some pricing for some stuff, for some options to either secure or manage that parking lot, just to see where we're at. When we talked about it, because it was my suggestion, but I didn't have a suggestion. I didn't have an idea how to fix it. It was just proposed because it's going to be an issue, or slight issue right now, but it's just going to get worse. And just trying to figure out a way to resolve said issue. Everybody's input is welcome on that because I really don't have a solution, and I don't want to say that I do. That's why we're all sitting in a committee trying to figure it out. But other than that, that's all we really talked about as far as that went.
Thank you. I was just asking because I know previous boards had discussed with the borough about putting parking meters there, and quite frankly, I don't want the borough doing anything on school property.
No, I
and
think,
putting meters.
I think
we
there was a
agree with you
talk.
on
Yeah,
that.
we agree with you on that.
It's
Yeah.
just that we're trying to figure out a cost-effective way to do it without creating a burden on anybody
When I
or on the
stand,
district. So, that's kind of what we're up against.
yeah, that one, Tim, that particular agenda item for that meeting, you probably should send out to the board members, reminding them, because I think there'd probably be a larger turnout. There are some steadfast opinions as to any arrangements that might or might not be made. And I know I was a part of those, and I'm not going to get into them here, those discussions with the borough several years ago. And I think maybe we probably should get in front of that.
Yeah, and that was the thought. I guess it would depend because our next budget finance is the 23rd, I believe. If Josh has any information pertaining to that, or if he has come up with anything to give us any ideas where we're going with it, it'll be on the agenda. And of course the agenda will be out for everybody. I don't know if he'll have anything by that time or not, or if it'll even be up for discussion on this particular one. But
Okay.
it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to, we can wait and do it in a committee meeting. It's just, this seems like it's rearing its head again. Any additional? Any program reports?
Yeah, just a few things to report. Last couple of weeks, our 3rd through 8th graders completed their PSSA testing. Went off without a hitch. We were completely all online doing our testing this year, and it worked out great. So congratulations to the 3rd through 8th graders for getting over that hurdle. Next week, we will be doing our Keystone exams, so that's the next testing hurdle that is coming up. But more importantly, this week we are in the middle of staff appreciation. I know the Gettysburg Area School District staff works very hard and does a lot of wonderful things for all of our students. So I just want to give a shout out to our staff and our teachers during staff appreciation. We're doing breakfast at each of the buildings throughout the week this week. And not that anybody's counting, but we're down to about 14 instructional days left. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add that they're doing that breakfast, and I don't know if the email went out, but I know that Jason's has extended in the past. If any board members want to stop in at any one of those particular buildings for that breakfast, feel free. I think I did maybe a year or two ago at the high school. It was nice.
Yeah.
So
We will be at the middle school tomorrow morning, and then Wednesday is Franklin Township. Thursday we'll be at Lincoln, and Friday at the high school, so feel free.
President Hassinger, quick
Yes.
question. Jeff, since the state assessments now, or I think you said they're 100% online, does that mean that the state will actually have a quicker turnaround time than they've had in the past, so that our
would
staff can actually use them in a formative manner?
it depends if it's in front or behind the budget.
One would hope.
Gotcha.
I unfortunately cannot attend any of those breakfasts because I'll be in my school, but I did want to extend a personal happy Teacher and Nurses Appreciation Week as well. So thank you for everything that all of those people do.
Okay, with nothing more, our next board meeting will be May 20th. As a side note, the board's going to hold a brief executive session immediately following. We're going to stay right here for that. It's related to a personnel matter, and again, it'll be brief. So, having said that, may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.